Duchess Sophie didn't flinch. When she finally spoke out in late 2025, her words dismantled the long-held story of Meghan Markle's amicable royal departure. What had once been portrayed as a mutual stepping away from tradition was reframed as something far more calculated and controversial. Sophie pointed directly to Meghan's flirtation with Prince William, describing it as behavior that crossed lines no one inside the palace could ignore. Behind closed doors, she claimed, it was William himself who felt increasingly uncomfortable, raising concerns that were ultimately impossible to overlook. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. This wasn't just awkwardness. According to Sophie, it was a direct threat to the cohesion of the real shift came not in what Sophie accused Meghan of, but in how unapologetically she defended the institution. For years, the royal family has endured critiques about its secrecy and resistance to modern change. But Sophie's interview flipped that script. She painted royal protocol not as rigidity but as defense, a necessary barrier to protect against personal ambitions that could shatter its foundations. Meghan's actions, however interpreted, became the flashpoint in a larger debate about hierarchy, loyalty, and the monarchy's role in the 21st century. And with Sophie's voice now part of the public record, the Sussex narrative may never look the same again. So, turns out the biggest royal bombshell of 2025 wasn't from Harry or Meghan. It was from Duchess Sophie. And no, this wasn't some cryptic, passive-aggressive gesture hidden behind palace walls. This was a direct hit. In a sit-down interview that's already being called one of the most revealing royal moments of the decade, Sophie didn't just spill the tea. She turned over the entire, and at the center of it, Meghan Markle, Prince William, and an alleged flirtation that, according to Sophie, didn't just cause tension. It ended Meghan's time in the royal family. Let's get right into it. For years, we were told the Sussexes stepped back from royal duties, that they left to find peace, that it was mutual, maybe even inevitable. But Sophie is now painting a very different picture, one where Meghan wasn't just escaping the spotlight. She was being shown the door for behavior the royals couldn't ignore. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. And the biggest issue? What Sophie suggests was an inappropriate level of flirtation between Meghan and Prince William. According to Sophie, Meghan's dynamic with William went far beyond what could be brushed off as friendliness. She described it as crossing boundaries, multiple times. And not just in passing. Enough to fracture trust. Enough to create serious unease behind the scenes. Enough to trigger a private intervention where the priority wasn't Meghan's personal freedom, but the stability of the monarchy itself. Because let's be clear, this wasn't about a side-eye across a garden party. Sophie framed it as a pattern of behavior that made waves through the royal household. And it was not well received. From the outside, Meghan and William always looked polite. Distant. Maybe formal, but Sophie says William himself raised concerns early on. And while the palace never addressed it publicly, the behind-the-scenes reality, it was messy. According to Sophie, William felt uncomfortable with Meghan's tone, her approach, and what she interpreted as charm. For him, it crossed a line. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Now here's where it all comes together. Sophie claims Meghan wasn't gently persuaded to take a break from royal life. She was encouraged to leave. As in, the palace believed it was better to quietly remove her from the environment rather than let the damage escalate. Not out of cruelty, not because of race, but because of what they viewed as a threat to the harmony within the monarchy. Suddenly that whole step back in 2020 looks a little less mutual. And that idea, that Meghan's departure was a protective measure, not a personal choice, is what makes this interview hit so hard. It reframes everything. From the Oprah tell-all to the Netflix docuseries, the Sussex narrative has always leaned heavily into personal conflict, mental health, media harassment, and racism. And while Sophie didn't deny those elements exist, she made it clear that from inside the palace, the real reason for the split wasn't public perception, it was behavior. Specifically, behavior that created tension not just with William and Catherine, but also with palace staff and even Harry himself. Sophie went further. She talked about Meghan's ambition, her desire to influence the internal dynamics of the royal family, how she clashed with protocol and seemed to push against hierarchy, trying, at times, to reframe her role or even rival Catherine's status. And if you believe Sophie's version, it wasn't subtle. It was strategic. To the palace, Meghan's independence wasn't just refreshing. It was disruptive. And if you add that to William feeling cornered by what Sophie describes as overfamiliar behavior, the result is a full-on diplomatic crisis inside the family. By now, you might be wondering, what did Harry make of all this? Well, Sophie didn't mince words. According to her, Harry felt blindsided, not just by Meghan's behavior, but by the palace's decision to support a quiet removal rather than confrontation. In the wake of it all, Harry became disillusioned, torn between loyalty to his wife and his role as a royal. But when push came to shove, the institution made its choice. Stability over sentiment, order over emotion. And when Sophie described it, she did it with conviction. She wasn't vague. She wasn't throwing shade in code. She straight up said Meghan's actions forced the palace's, and people noticed. Since the interview aired, public opinion has shifted. Again, polls across the UK, the US, and Commonwealth countries showed a dip in favorability for Meghan and Harry, especially among those who'd once defended their departure as brave and necessary. For Meghan, the damage was immediate. Media coverage turned cold. Foundations and partnerships started to distance themselves. Discussions that used a focus on racism and trauma started focusing on accountability. And for many viewers, Sophie's calm but pointed tone came off as both revealing and defensive. She clearly sees herself as protecting the monarchy, defending tradition against behavior that she believes undermined the institution's integrity. Of course, not everyone's buying it. Critics were quick to label the interview as biased, outdated, and rooted in double standards. They argue that Sophie's remarks reflect long-standing issues within the monarchy, where race, class, and gender still determine who's accepted and who's punished. They pointed out that similar behaviors from other royals were brushed off, while Meghan's was scrutinized and weaponized. The interview, in that sense, didn't just reframe Meghan's exit. It reignited an entire culture war. One side praised Sophie's transparency. The other accused her of spinning history to preserve an institution in decline. But here's the thing, even those who disagree with Sophie's interpretation can't deny the impact. Her words gave the royal family a new PR weapon. A clean, internal explanation that doesn't rely on media narratives or outside forces. It puts the blame back on Meghan, not the press. It reframes her not as a victim of palace coldness, but as a catalyst for her own exile. And that changes everything. It also raises uncomfortable questions about what kind of behavior the royals do tolerate and what crosses a line. Sophie made it clear royal protocol exists for a reason, not just for show, but as a mechanism of protection. Against chaos, against disruption, against ambition that doesn't play by the rules. PW, in other words, if you flirt with a future king, even if you think it's harmless and that flirtation is perceived as a threat, you're out, no matter who you are. And that's the underlying message here. Sophie didn't just expose personal drama. She laid bare how the monarchy handles internal conflict. Quietly, efficiently, and without room for personalities that don't conform. She didn't soften the blow, either. She called Meghan's ambitions destabilizing. She emphasized William's discomfort. She stressed how Catherine kept her composure. And she pointed to Harry as a man caught in the wreckage of his wife's decisions. By the time the interview ended, one thing was clear. The palace didn't push Meghan out because she was American, or biracial, or a former actress. They pushed her out because they didn't trust her. And now, with Sophie's words out in the open, the royal PR machine has a brand new chapter to write. One where Meghan's royal exit isn't a fairy tale gone wrong, but a necessary correction to preserve the crown. The response has been global. Headlines, op-eds, debates on breakfast TV and primetime specials. Supporters of Meghan calling foul, royalists clapping back. And caught in the middle, a public that's watched this saga for years now being asked to reconsider who they believe and why. Is this the truth? Or just a monarchy rewriting the past to justify a scandal that never fully made sense? That's where things get murky. But one thing's certain, Sophie's interview has changed the game. Whether you think she's defending outdated tradition or finally saying what everyone behind palace walls was too scared to admit, her version is now part of the official narrative. And it's not going anywhere. So, what do you think? Was Meghan unfairly painted as a villain? Or was Sophie just the first one brave enough to tell the story from inside? Hit the comments with your take. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this, and share this with anyone who still thinks Meghan chose to leave the royals on her own terms. Because if Sophie's right, she didn't. She was removed. And here's where things get even more layered. Because as much as Sophie's comments targeted Meghan, they also exposed the tightrope every royal walks behind the scenes. There's this unwritten rule, maybe even an unspoken code, that what happens within palace walls stays within palace walls. For decades, scandals were managed, not exposed. Affairs, fallouts, even full-blown family crises were handled quietly, buried beneath carefully worded press releases and polite smiles. But Sophie didn't play by that rule this time. She spoke directly, publicly, on the record. She knew exactly what she was doing, and that's part of why this hit like a seismic wave. This wasn't just one duchess talking about another. This was a senior royal, married to the Queen's youngest son, stepping out of the shadows to say, enough. Because for her, this wasn't just about Meghan. It was about the monarchy itself. According to Sophie, the issue wasn't who Meghan was. It was how she operated. She challenged the order of things. She questioned the rules. She wanted to reinvent a system that, like it or not, depends on tradition to survive. And that, to Sophie, was dangerous. Especially when it started to involve William. The second in line to the throne is not just another family member. He's the face of the future. The monarchy has been grooming him since birth. Every interaction he has, every word he speaks, every look he gives is scrutinized. So when Meghan, a newcomer, began engaging with him in ways that William felt were crossing a line, intentionally or not, it became a full-blown. Sophie says William flagged it early. He didn't make a scene. He didn't go public. But behind closed doors, he made it clear he wasn't comfortable. That alone would have set off alarms in any institution. But in this one, where image is everything, where the line between personal discomfort and constitutional disaster is razor-thin, it became a fire that couldn't be left to smolder. According to Sophie, Meghan was spoken to multiple times, told to tone it down, respect the space. But the behavior didn't stop. Whether she didn't see the issue or didn't agree there was one, the tension only got worse. And William, caught between personal boundaries and public decorum, reportedly started pulling away. He distanced himself, not just physically, but emotionally. The warm, if slightly formal, camaraderie between the two couples, gone. And Sophie claims that rift didn't just damage family ties, it shook the royal machine. Because now, it wasn't just about Meghan and Harry's future. It was about protecting the crown's most vital player, William. That's when the decision was made, not publicly, not formally, but internally. Meghan's continued presence was seen as a liability. Her rapport with the media, her ability to command attention, her refusal to fully submit to royal pecking order, it all added up. She had to go. Of course, the exit was presented as a mutual decision, a desire for independence, for privacy. But according to Sophie, that narrative was crafted after the real one. A soft landing, meant to avoid humiliation. A way out that looked like choice, but was actually a carefully managed extraction. And that changes how we look at everything that followed. The Oprah interview, the Spotify deal, the Netflix documentaries. All of it seemed, at the time, like retaliation. Like Meghan and Harry finally speaking their truth. But if Sophie's account holds, it wasn't a battle. They were already out. Their side of the story was a postscript, not a protest. And that brings us to Harry. Sophie didn't throw him under the bus. In fact, she described him with something that almost sounded like pity. She called him torn, loyal, struggling to reconcile love and legacy. In her eyes, Harry was caught in a war he didn't stop but couldn't stop. He believed Meghan. He trusted her version of events. And when things started going south, he stood by her, even as it meant turning his back on the only life he'd ever known. But Sophie made it clear, loyalty doesn't erase consequences. By aligning himself with Meghan, Harry effectively placed himself outside the palace's protection. The moment he stepped away with her, he stopped being a senior royal and started being something else, a figure caught between two worlds. And the longer he stayed out, the harder it became to return. Now, all of this might sound like ancient royal drama repackaged for modern audiences, but the ripple effect from Sophie's interview proves otherwise. Public opinion shifted fast. Polls in the UK showed a drop in support for Meghan, and, notably, a softening toward the institution. People who once doubted the palace's narrative started reconsidering. Maybe it wasn't racism. Maybe it wasn't just snobbery. Maybe it really was about behavior. In the US, it was more complicated. Meghan still has strong support in certain circles, but even there, cracks began to form. The idea that the palace might have acted out of self-preservation rather than prejudice forced a re-evaluation of the story many had accepted at face value. And then there's Catherine. While she didn't speak in the interview, Sophie brought her up multiple times, not to stir drama, but to highlight how she responded to Meghan's presence. According to Sophie, Catherine remained composed, even as tensions rose. She didn't lash out. She didn't compete. She simply held her ground, playing the long game. And it worked, because now, with Meghan gone and the palace standing firm, Catherine's image has never been stronger. Grace under pressure, loyalty to the crown, the embodiment of duty over drama. Sophie contrasted that with Meghan's approach, bold, assertive, emotional, outspoken, not inherently wrong, but in the royal world, risky, and ultimately not survivable. The bigger takeaway here isn't just that Meghan was removed. It's that her removal was, in the palace's eyes, necessary. To protect William, to protect Catherine, to protect the crown. Which brings us to the final layer, the monarchy itself. Sophie's interview wasn't just a defense of tradition. It was a declaration, a reminder that the royal family isn't just a family. It's a system, one that survived wars, abdications, divorces, even public ridicule. And if you want to be part of it, you don't get to rewrite the rules. You either adapt or you're out. Meghan, in Sophie's view, didn't adapt. She charmed. She challenged. She brought charisma and disruption in equal measure. But in a world built on structure and symbolism, that kind of unpredictability can't be sustained. And that's why, according to Sophie, the decision was made. Quietly. Permanently. Now, it's up to the public to decide who they believe. Was Meghan unfairly pushed out for being different? Or was she a disruptor who underestimated the power of the system she joined? Whatever your answer, one thing is clear. The story isn't over. Not by a long shot. And if this interview is any sign of what's to come, we're about to see a whole new chapter of royal reckoning unfold in real time. And just when you thought the drama had peaked, Sophie's revelation sparked a fresh wave of international fallout that no one in the palace could fully contain, even with decades of polished crisis management behind them. Because here's the thing, royal scandals don't stay royal. They ripple into politics, philanthropy, culture, and media. And once Sophie cracked open the truth behind Meghan's departure, it lit a match that exposed not just personal failures, but systemic fractures inside one of the oldest institutions across the Commonwealth. Debates reignited. Was this the monarchy defending its integrity? Or was it an elite institution once again protecting its own by sidelining someone they never truly accepted? In Australia and Canada, Republican sentiment flared again. Citizens and politicians who'd once tolerated the monarchy as tradition now questioned its place more openly. They weren't just asking, what happened with Meghan? They were asking, why does this system still exist in the 21st century? Meanwhile, in the US, the reaction was messier. For some, Sophie's word was seen as overdue clarification, finally offering an insider perspective that made sense of the Sussexes' dramatic exit. For others, it was a vindictive swipe, thinly veiled in royal PR polish, aiming to protect a monarchy already riddled with privilege, secrecy, and double standards. But wherever you landed, the message from Sophie was loud. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a consequence. And at the center of it all was that alleged flirtation. That subtle but seismic crack in the royal facade. Sophie didn't present it as scandalous in the tabloid sense. She wasn't interested in sensationalizing Meghan and William. What she emphasized, repeatedly, was the impact, the way it affected trust, the way it shifted power dynamics, the way it changed how everyone in the room looked at Meghan. Because even if it was innocent in intent, perception is everything in a world built on image. And according to Sophie, that perception was damaging enough to justify a palace-backed exit strategy. Let's be honest, this isn't a new pattern for the firm. When someone becomes too unpredictable, too polarizing, too loud for the role they've been assigned, they are quietly phased out. Whether it's a royal spouse or a disgraced peer, the system doesn't argue. It edits. And Meghan, despite all the talk of modernizing the monarchy, was never going to be allowed to rewrite that rulebook, especially not while challenging the heir. And yet, Sophie's interview isn't just about the past. It's a warning, a message to anyone watching the royals thinking they can come in and shake things up. You don't change the monarchy. The monarchy changes you, or it removes you. The palace might smile for the cameras, but behind closed doors, it operates like a fortress. And according to Sophie, when Meghan pushed too far, when she tried to build her own path, sidestepped protocol, and got a little too close to the future king, the decision was already made. She wasn't pushed to the edge. She was cut off completely. And that makes the silence since even more. Meghan and Harry haven't responded publicly to Sophie's claims. No press statements. No reactive interviews. But insiders say the damage is done. Funding for their philanthropic projects has slowed. Media partners are treading carefully. And while Harry remains publicly loyal, those closest to the situation suggest he's deeply conflicted. Again. Because if Sophie's telling the truth, then Harry's trust was broken not just by the palace, but potentially by Meghan, too. That's a reality no one in their camp wants to face. But the shadow it casts, it's long. And this isn't just about whether Meghan flirted with William. It's about whether Meghan knowingly played a role in destabilizing the very structure she claimed to be victimized by. Whether her exit was truly about self-preservation or quietly enforced exile. And if Sophie's version sticks, which it already is, in royal-adjacent circles, then we may be watching the final unraveling of the Sussex brand as we know it. The story has always been about two sides, victim versus institution. Sophie just threw a third narrative into the mix, one where actions have consequences, and the real drama isn't about who said what to Oprah, but what happened before the cameras ever rolled. So, here we are. The fairy tale has officially become a courtroom drama, and Sophie might have just delivered the most devastating testimony yet. If you've been riding this roller coaster from the start, you already know how many times the public's been asked to pick a side. But this time, the stakes feel different. The cracks feel permanent, and the royals aren't pretending anymore. So, what do you believe? Was Meghan the modernizer who threatened the old guard? Or was she the chaos the palace had to quietly remove before things blew up in public? Drop your thoughts below. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next twist, because with this family, there's always another chapter coming.